As a former IELTS examiner, here's why 80% of students stay stuck at 6. Now, over the years, I've seen students get 6 many times. They take the test the first time and they get 6. They take it again and they get 6 again, even though they've studied more. They take it again and then they get 5.5, and once more, and they're back to 6 again. And so their score never seems to move higher. So thinking about task 1 first. So in most band 6 task 1 scripts, they're okay. They don't fail, unless, of course, you wanted to get a 7 or higher. However, these band 6 task 1s, they simply don't give the examiner a reason to go higher. And this is the point. Your writing is quite good, but there's no reason for the examiner, in the examiner's mind, to put your score any higher. So what does a band 6 in writing task 1 actually mean? Well, it does mean that the candidate understands this task and has shown the examiner this, so that's good. It also means that the data is mostly accurate, and again, that's what the examiner wants to see, of course. And the language is generally clear. There are errors, but they don't stop the examiner from understanding what the candidate means when they're writing. So when you look at that, yeah, that looks okay. That's okay for a 6. But you don't want band 6, you want to go higher. So we've got to look into the mind of the examiner. The examiner is not thinking, oh, this is terrible, and look at all the mistakes, etc. No, it's not that at all. Instead, they're thinking, well, this is competent. It's competent writing. However, it's limited. And that's the word, of course, limited. You do not want to hear this in your IELTS speaking or writing, because it means you can't go any higher for some reason. Let's look at a typical band 6 sentence. Category A increased over the period, while categories B and C showed some changes. Right. Is there anything that could be better in that? So it sounds okay. We haven't seen the graph, but it sounds okay. But from the examiner's point of view, it doesn't really tell the examiner what matters the most. What matters the most? So read it again. Category A increased over the period, while categories B and C showed some changes. So what mattered the most? Now let's compare. While all categories changed over time, the most notable feature is the sharp rise of category A, which clearly exceeded the others. Right. When you look at this example, nothing has been added and nothing has been removed. But when you read it, your idea of the graph or the categories is much clearer. Now, why? Second sentence here makes a decision, and examiners notice that immediately. So when you read that sentence, I think now you know what is more important. This really comes down to effort versus judgment. Now, in task 1, it's not really about showing that you're trying hard. It's showing that you can select the information and make judgments. So you can select and make judgments. That's what it's about. So the examiner doesn't really care if you're trying very hard. The examiner is not thinking, oh, this student's made a lot of effort, I must give them a high score. They're focused on what information the candidate has selected, and then he looks at the judgment the candidate has made in organizing and describing this information. And then we have the overview problem. Now, an overview is not a summary of all the information that you're going to talk about in the essay. No, it's not a shorter version of the data. Instead, an overview is a decision, and it's a decision about what's most important. Therefore, if your overview says something like, overall, the figures increased over time. Overall, there were differences between the categories. The examiner will then think, yes, and. So these overviews don't really tell you that much. They're quite general, and you could use them for almost every overview. Band 7 overview tells the examiner what dominates, what's most important, what you can see the most. And it also tells the examiner what contrasts and also what changes matter more than others. So you can see already there is a decision being made by the candidate about what's most important and what's least important, and the details there are a little bit in the overview. Band 6 versus a Band 7. So Band 6 candidates report. It's almost like they just report on the information they see. But a Band 7 doesn't just report. A Band 7 organizes in terms of priorities. So they organize their essay in terms of what's most important, what's next, its importance. So they don't just flatly report everything, they prioritize. A major factor for a Band 6 candidate could be fear, for they may know that the marking criteria requires you to talk about everything on the graph or on the diagram. Therefore, sometimes a Band 6 script can feel like their candidate is afraid to leave anything out. They have to put everything in there. That means every category, every year, and every movement. And they're afraid if they leave out one little thing, their mark is destroyed. However, higher band scripts do not worry about leaving things out. Instead, they focus on deprioritizing information or prioritizing information. So they decide what's most important, they prioritize that, and they decide what's least important and they deprioritize that. And why is that good? Because when an examiner reads it in the essay, they think this candidate knows what matters and what doesn't matter. They know what's most important and they know what's least important. Therefore, let's look at what examiners need to see. So, what examiners need you to show is selection. They need to see that you understand not just the information, but you also understand that all this information is not the same, it's not equal, that some things are more important than others. Therefore, you must show this in your essay. Examiners also need to see hierarchy. So this means that the examiner needs to see clearly in your writing that some trends matter more than others. And also they need to see confidence in what you've written. They need to see that your choices are clear. So make them clear and you're not trying to be safe or careful when you describe the information or when you prioritize the information. So if you are stuck on 5.5 or 6, it's not because your English is weak. It's because perhaps you don't understand what the examiner is looking for. So you need to understand examiner level judgment, what the examiner wants from you in order to get higher than the 6. In the next episode, we'll look at the overview in detail. If you want to explore this examiner-based approach in depth, the way the examiner looks at your writing and what he wants from you, then I've linked a short page below explaining how my Step 2 writing course works. It's designed specifically for candidates who feel their English is good enough, but are still stuck around the 5.5 or 6. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next time.